Hey, everybody, wheels up. Week 233. Welcome. And yes, we are shut down next week, and you should be too. You should be giving thanks for all the many blessings in your life, and hopefully you're with some loved ones as well. So, anyway, you guys know the drill. You can harass us on the chat, and some people don't pay attention to instructions very well, and they still ask questions in the chat, but we'll give you a pass. You won't get a Starbucks card if you do that, though. I'm just saying. Hit us with the Q&A. In the Q&A, they keep changing the buttons on Zoom. Have you ever noticed that? Like, they keep changing stuff. Um, just when we think that we kind of get into a rhythm and we know where all the stuff is, then they change it. So there you go. Updates even this morning. So we are going to be talking about, hey, what's happening with this EV, tax credit. Uh, we'll talk about that, but there's all kinds of other stuff that's coming down that we need to talk about, that changes are coming, and things that are in place that you need to be aware of that we're going to remind you again. So anyway, Adam, before Cliff Clavin dives into some of his fun facts, Jack Santon, hello. You have anything that you want to rant on?
No, I'm actually pretty good. How can I rant when I haven't watched the news?
Oh, what a great mental health move that is.
My it's funny, my stepmother, who is an avid news follower, shot me a note the other day about some changes that are happening in the some proposed North Carolina changes that don't impact tax policy. She's like, "Are they going to get away with that?" I'm like, "I don't even know what you're talking about. Kind of happy I don't."
Yeah.
So there you go. So no, I have no rants that I'm aware of. So there you go.
Okay. Well, and Chewy is looking out the pane of
But
glass
she
in
would
the.
like to be let out, so I will do that now.
Okay. Then we'll segue to Jack.
Well, I will say, and Adam can't hear me because he doesn't have his earphones on, but I mean, my heart rate just increased as he was saying, "What, you haven't been paying attention to the news?" So, I'll take on that stress, a little
Okay, there you
stress.
go.
Okay. Um, so before we get to the core of what we're going to talk about, I need to share some very important news that you guys may have heard about, and I know it's been on your minds. It's been on your minds for decades, and finally, the federal government is admitting to the conspiracy of the fact that, okay, there is no such thing as UFOs. So there was a report, the Pentagon came out with a report on UFOs, including hundreds of new incidents, but no evidence of aliens. So you have three former government employees and a journalist believe the government is still hiding, and they call them UAPs instead of
Mm.
UFOs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. That's the new term for UFOs. That's like when we were down in Florida at Cocoa Beach and we were getting on a cruise ship. We went early and then they launched a rocket up
Oh, cool.
and it was unmanned, but it exploded.
Oh, wow.
I didn't think the rocket had rocket boosters, and I'm watching, kind of what you normally see, like with old shuttle launches. And
Yeah.
so I say to my kids, I'm like, I don't think that that's correct. And we had been listening to the broadcast, and then they said, we've had an anomalous incident. And so that's their code for, oh crap, the thing is blown up kind of thing in pieces over
Uh,
the ocean. So, all right. So the review includes hundreds of cases of misidentified balloons, birds, satellites, as well as some other easier explanations, such as near misses between commercial airliners and other kind of mysterious things that went on. Um, this organization or department has discovered no evidence of extraterrestrial beings, activity, or technology. They reviewed 757 cases from around the world that were reported to U.S. authorities from May 23 to June of 24. The great majority of the reported incidents occurred in airspace. 49 occurred at altitudes that are 62 miles up, which is considered outer space or into space. Investigators found explanations for nearly 300 of the incidents, but that leaves many others that were unexplained. I mean, if you get to a point where you explain most of them, but there was a significant number that were unexplained. So I think I had a very interesting discussion in all seriousness about this with my daughter, who is more well versed in the Bible and her faith than many people, including myself. And so it became a discussion about, okay, well, if there are other beings like us, and so I don't want to get into all of that, but it was just it invited a very interesting conversation within my family about, could there be life, sentient beings like us elsewhere in the universe? And her answer was no. And she had some pretty good explanations, but it was faith-based. And I said, well, scientifically based, maybe there's a different theory, kind of like the whole Big Bang theory versus evolution. And I understand what my faith says, I'm supposed to believe, but okay. So anyway, I don't want to dive deep into that or invite a discussion about people's perspectives on faith and things like that, as a lawnmower is being run in my backyard. So
It's perfect timing,
yeah.
but we don't really hear it except like there is a like when you're talking, it kind of like what's so it's kind of like Star Wars. Um, oh my
Fantastic.
gosh. Well, leave it up to the government to make an acronym, change an acronym and make it even more difficult to pronounce or remember. Oh gosh, that's funny. So before you go into the other thing, this is an interesting little chat that we got from Joseph. Do you think Mark Robinson has a valid and successful legal claim against CNN? That's for the lawyer.
Yeah.
There have been plenty of bad things that have been said about people. I would say, and again, this is me paraphrasing, but when you put yourself in the public eye, it's not that you have permission to defame people, but things that are going to come out, and then it is free speech, and then it is interpretation of things or perspectives of certain things that come out that are a little more protected. Now, when you go off the rails on that and impact people, their livelihood, their families, and it creates problems like death threats and things like that. So, but as far as I'm sure that and in fact, I think there is a lawsuit pending. I don't know if it's been dismissed or what's going on with it, but there are plenty of lawsuits currently out there pending against media and other places and people that have put information out there in the public domain, which is more prevalent now because of the internet. And I say now, meaning the past few decades in comparison to the past, that is out there, and people's ability to comment upon those things via comments, chat rooms, and things like that, that then get manipulated a certain way. So you can create an argument or show that, okay, this kind of mob mentality by cutting and pasting from different places to create this narrative. And again, I'm not saying that's what happened. I don't know much about the whole Robinson thing other than I'm happy that those commercials are no longer on my television when I turn them
Me
on.
too.
Man, gotta love the middle of November when all that stuff stops happening. So, but yeah, to answer your question, I mean, it really, the legal answer, it depends. I don't know the facts and circumstances of it, but I will say that there is a different standard that is applied to people that are publicly facing, that choose to go into public office. There's more scrutiny, and so more protection for saying things that are not so nice, and it not being actionable in a lawsuit.
Yeah. Well, if the allegations are true, he should have been vetted. And he didn't deserve to win. That's for doggone sure. And if they weren't true, man, that's a crying shame. And I know he's kind of a polarizing guy, but like, man, it's terrifying what can be done out there. And what I learned after my partner embezzlement a long time ago, gosh, 30 years ago, um, when I was talking to somebody about it, I felt so much shame. Like, how did I miss that and whatever? But I talked to this guy and he said, well, um, you know who's going to win, right? As far as if you sue him. And I chose not to, but I said, who's that? And he said, the lawyers. They always win.
Yeah.
And they're pretty much right. The reality is you better have a war chest if you're going to do anything like that. You better have a war chest. And so that's just kind of sad. I would love to see tort reform in our country. I think it would help businesses because you have to be able to defend even crazy, frivolous things. It's just crazy, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about today. Um, let's move from the uh, UFOs or now the UAPs. Is that what it is? UAP? Like,
It's now that I have my glasses on. UAP, yes.
yeah, UAP. Yeah, I'm not switching. I'm sticking with UFO. Um, so anyway, what else do we got going on? So I know you had done some additional in research on something else, Jack, right?
Yeah, well, one of the things we talked about, and I don't think it was the headline in the LinkedIn invite that went out, but starting with overtime rule changes and the federal court striking that
Yeah.
down. So may as well start with that. So just a little bit of background that um, the back in April, the U.S. Department of Labor put out what they deemed to be a final rule, meaning that you have to comply with it because of their regulatory power that has been granted to them by Congress. It would have raised the minimum salary required to be paid to most employees classified as exempt from the FLSA overtime and minimum wage requirements. And it impacted employees classified exempt under executive, administrative, and professional employee exemptions. And specifically, there were two phases to the increase. The final rule raised the salary amount from $684 per week, which translates to $35,000 or so annually, to $844 per week, which is close to $44,000 annually, effective on July 1, 2024. A second increase would have raised it to $58,000 annually. So it went from 35K, 35.5 to 43.8, so 44 to 58.6 as of January 2025. Now, I suspect that maybe a few of you, maybe more than a few of you, have complied with this rule because of the phase-in effective as of July 1st, 2024. We had also talked about previously that there's what's called highly compensated employees. And the final rule increased the amount required to be paid from 107 to 132. So again, raising the bar before they're deemed exempt to a higher number. And then that was effective in July of 24. And then the second increase would have gone to 151. So again, those numbers are 107 to 133 to 151. And then there were every 3 years, there was a modification and adjustment. And so the reason why the federal court, and this is, we talked about different things as far as what is applicable to who when it's a regulation or a statute or whatever. And when somebody in a courtroom or a judge says, hey, this doesn't, we're putting a hold on this. Does it apply to the entire nation? Does it apply to only that state? Does it apply to those people that are listed on the complaint as plaintiffs only? In this case, it's federal court. It applies across the board. And the reasoning is that the court held the Department of Labor exceeded its authority and that the DOL simply does not have the authority to effectively displace the duties test with such a predominant salary level test. And I'll explain that in a moment. The court also noted that its analysis applied equally to a higher classification exemption and the related increases to minimum compensation amounts. And then they do not have the authority to implement the automatic increases, the stair step over the past, for the past 6 months and going into the future, but then also this 3-year look back or increase. So there are 3 tests with respect to minimum wage and overtime requirements. The first test is salary basis test. Employee is paid a predetermined and fixed amount that is not subject to reduction because of variations in the quality or quantity of work performed. So it isn't based upon your actual output. It is based upon time, essentially. So weekly amount, etc. The salary level test is the amount of salary paid to the employee must meet a minimum specified amount. So those are those dollar amounts that we were talking about. And then duties test, the employee must perform executive, administrative, or professional duties. So you cannot take an inline blue collar employee at kind of the bottom of the food chain of the company and they're exempt. There has to be some level of authority beyond being the worker on the floor, on the factory kind of thing. And so those 3 tests are looked at together. They're not looked at separately. And so what I said before was they were saying that it was an improper focus on the salary level test, so the amount that's paid, versus these other 2 factors that need to be considered in conjunction with each other to make sure that any modifications are appropriate. And so they were focusing on and advancing one of those tests and creating different standards without considering these other two elements of the full testing amount. So this article basically says what's the next steps. So the court's decision blocks increases that were scheduled to go effect in 25 and invalidates the previously required 24 increases that occurred nationwide. Effective immediately, the salary level test for executive administrative professionals returns to its prior amount, and the HCE, the higher earner amounts, returns back to the amounts that were in effect prior to July 1st of this year. What can happen next? The Department of Labor could decide to appeal the court ruling, and the appeals court could either uphold the lower court's ruling, so the invalidation, or reverse the lower court's ruling. They said this could happen prior to the new president taking office on January 20th. And the Trump administration could choose to abandon such an appeal and could also choose to issue a new rule. So we really don't know where it falls into that space of we don't know what's going to happen because the new administration, again, this is a regulatory agency that is under the executive branch. And so we just really don't know. We can only speculate what might or might not happen. So that's what's going on with that. But the message is that we're back to the numbers that we were at before, that if you've made some increases, what is not clear in this is the ability of an employer to go back to the old numbers for the period of time between July and now. And so, I can't provide any suggestions because it would never be legal advice on this program. Some suggestions or guidance to what you should do if you did do that. I think for practical purposes, it'd be kind of difficult to make changes, and maybe the thing to do is if you're going to revert back to those numbers, is just treat the second half of the year as just a modified pay structure, and then maybe go back on January 1st to where you were at before. But I can't suggest either way because I don't know what, and there may be guidance that's coming out to say, okay, well, you have some options. And let's say that you were going to make a modification and then you had to adjust a person's compensation. Like maybe maybe you paid them overtime and you shouldn't have. Well, what happens to that money? Yeah, that you paid to them. How is it treated for tax purposes? How is it treated, in compensation increases for 2025? All those things. So, this is more of alerting you to what happened, but not being able to tell you or provide guidance as to what is suggested moving forward. And if I do end up seeing that guidance or finding that guidance in the coming weeks, certainly we'll be happy to share any and all of that.
Things are changing. So speaking of speculation, Joe, good to see you here, Joe. He asked this question in the Q&A. Thank you, Joe. Will the impact of Doge requiring federal employees to come back to working in the office from 8 to 6 have an impact on the private sector in a similar vein?
So, these kind of rules are only applicable, obviously, to federal employees or to the constituency that they are, to be meant to be applicable to, and sometimes provide guidance as to what the private sector might do. What we have seen, though, is that the private sector is not going along the same cadence as far as coming back to work. There have been some experimentations or experiments as to, forcing people to come back. What was interesting is I was reading through some of the articles for the best places to work. And one of the questions in there that I think was across the board is, what are you doing for your return back to work? And a lot of those responses were still, it's mixed. I will tell you for us, it is mixed in that for the attorneys, it is, in our discretion. So in fact, I'm working from home today. I don't do it. I maybe do it once, twice max per week. If that, I just think that I'm more efficient in many ways in my office. But today I knew that I needed to be undistracted, not distracted, despite the lawn mowing going on, which will finish soon, to focus on some things. And I just didn't want to be distracted. So I know, where my lanes are and what I need to do in order to do my job. So there have been failures of forced back to work. There have been successes of making people come back to work, and for good reasons, as far as efficiency, as far as and there are arguments on both sides of it as to, is it more expensive to have someone come to an office and work in the office, or is it less expensive in the meaning more efficient to have someone working at 8 a.m., at 8:30 a.m. instead of coming into the office, putting their stuff down, going to get their coffee, yabbering with other people. And then the counter argument to that is, well, you have to have a social aspect to your office. I mean, that's how we all work together and collaborate. And so again, it's a ping pong back and forth as to whether it's good or not, but it's also a ping pong as to whether or not it's going to be mandated or if it's going to be left up to the employees subject to approval. So, none of our employees are going to say, all of a sudden I'm going to start working at home from 4 days a week. There would be discussion, and you have to be careful too, because you don't want to be accused of showing favoritism to anyone. And but I have no problem saying to someone who's been with us for 2 decades, yeah, that's fine. If you want to work from home 2 days a week, and we maybe tell someone else who is not as tenured, yeah, 1 day a week. So
Yeah.
anyway, long-winded answer of saying, it doesn't flow through to the private sector, but sometimes it is guidance into what the private sector might do.
Yeah, a couple comments on that in the overtime rules. I do find it interesting that state and local governments have actually been, whether they're enforcing the rules or not is a different story, but the Biden administration did tell everybody to come back in the office. It's just it's just there hasn't been that much in terms of enforcement. And here locally, same thing, Mecklenburg County, everybody's supposed to be back in the office working. So I have found it interesting that state and local governments and the federal government, at least have come out with a policy about it, from a change perspective that they haven't necessarily enforced. And to Jack's point, you're not seeing a huge uptick in the private sector. And I suspect it's for a lot of the same reasons. It's like still a tight labor market. The verdict's still out in terms of what actually happens when you do that. If you feel like you have a tight labor force already, if you felt like in other words, if I felt like BGW had 30 extra people floating around here, you know, I perhaps would not, and I wasn't having to pay 25% of salary expense to a recruiter to replace them. I might have a different take on return to work that I currently have. As I'm also working from my house today with a barking dog in the background, wondering, I wonder why I'm doing that on webinar day. But to the point of the overtime rules, the one that jumped out at me about I understand that the Texas court couldn't, necessarily say, well, we like some parts of this, but we don't like other parts of this. But the one that jumped out at me that actually kind of works in the opposite favor of what we like to give to clients in the form of advice is the highly compensated executive number, because where that comes into place is that when you've got when you've got the Cadillac version of the retirement plan, which basically with 401k plans and other retirement plans, I mean, typically you can't discriminate between employees. However, you can do some limited discrimination with respect to classes of employees. And one of those classes is highly compensated executives, meaning I can do more for highly compensated executives than I have to do for the rank and file, as long as I follow some general rules. So if Gary and Jack are both highly compensated executives, I can't say, Jack, you're an all-star, Gary, you suck ass. You get nothing. But if Gary and Jack are both highly compensated employees, but Adam is not, I can say, Jack and Gary, you get the wristwatch, Adam, you do not. So I mean, it's not that black and white, but it's pretty damn close. So, the one positive benefit of that is that they actually raise the bar, on the highly, for the purpose of that test. But now if that's going back, it just means that, it just means that the pool of people that are now open to that retirement plan calculation just got back to being bigger again, because at 150 it's like, man, I could get pretty isolated in terms of who I'm targeting at that wage level, whereas where it's at today, I mean, it's not really that targeted at all with the wage inflation that's occurred. So that's a potential downside of the ruling. So anyway, ready to talk taxes anytime you're ready to talk about those, Gary.
Yeah. So I want to know, because you are an EV driver with that Ford Lightning,
Yep.
and you waited a long time for that, and you can power your house in case we have a storm that goes down, which I think is really cool. But you are also a hybrid driver, because you and I took that hybrid down to Orlando, Florida, a year or so ago for an event. And I'm assuming that the EV tax credit that is likely on the chopping block, you can go into that in more depth, but I'm assuming that that does not apply to hybrids. Is that an accurate statement?
So good question. So the tax credit that currently is in place applies to anything that has a dedicated battery. So the plug-in hybrid qualifies in that sense for the tax credit. So what they're talking about getting rid of is that whether it's a plug, but a hybrid doesn't. So like if I have a hybrid, but it doesn't have a plug-in, then it doesn't qualify because it's not like a dedicated electric vehicle in the more traditional sense. So what they're talking about getting rid of is the $7,500 tax credit that exists right now. So that was part of the Inflation Reduction Act that got passed. So now I get to go on my rant, Gary.
Go for it.
So first off, you see like, so remember, Adam just doesn't like hypocrisy. So you see whether it's a good idea or bad idea, that's debatable. But the estimated effect of the tax credit is about $1 billion a year. So if you said I'm getting rid of the tax credit, that would save the federal government $1 billion a year. So I'm only pointing that out to say every penny counts. That's not a lot of pennies. Especially when it comes to the other energy provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act that are in the hundreds of billions of dollars associated with alternative energy type projects, a lot of which are occurring in Republican districts, which is why you see, there was a group of Republican lawmakers that wrote a letter to Johnson saying, hey, don't get rid of this because they're spending a lot of money in my district, for this stuff. So, I think repealing the EV credit, sounds popular, but at the same time, it's not actually costing the government. It's not going to save a whole lot. Like that's not where the big savings would come from. The big savings would come from, we're not going to incentivize anybody to build any nuclear. We're not going to incentivize anybody to build any wind. We're not going to incentivize anybody to build any solar. We're not going to incentivize anybody for training programs to train the workers to be able to do any of this stuff. It's all off. Like, in other words, you have to repeal the whole thing, to really get a big savings. That's just a general statement. What I find funny about Elon Musk's position on this in particular is that the way that the EV credit used to work prior to the Inflation Reduction Act is you got a $7,500 credit. However, once a vehicle hit a certain production target, the credit went away because the idea of the credit was to help, fledgling EV companies kind of get off the ground. And once they had their footing, we're going to take the incentive away. So the early Tesla models stopped qualifying for the credit a few years ago because they hit the production quotas. But some Tesla models still qualified. Now, with the new Inflation Reduction Act, all Tesla models qualify. So, I don't see Elon looking to write a check for the billions of dollars that early Tesla adopters got in the way of incentives as a way of saying, you know what? Thank you for helping me get my business off the ground on stable footing and very profitable. Now that we're doing so well and we don't need this incentive anymore, and I'm all for reducing the government, I'm going to pay that money. I don't see that happening. In other words, like, he didn't complain very much. He didn't complain very much when the credit was put in place. Hey, I know you've got that EV incentive out there, but I don't want my cars to qualify. So instead, I'm just going to turn around and write a $7,500 check right back to the government. Because no, sir, we don't need it here at Tesla. Like, I didn't hear any of that from the early days. What I hear about it is now. So I just, I didn't personally. I think people, like, just as a person who owns an EV and an electric hybrid. For me, the $7,500 tax credit is nice. I'm not going to say no to that, but really that means nothing. In terms of the buying of the car. What matters is the fact that it has zero maintenance, and I'm not paying, like, the price of gas when it's plugged into my house is the equivalent of about 25 cents per gallon. That's why I do it. So it's not a $7,500 tax credit. Now, I'm not going to write a check back to the government for my tax credit back. Well, actually, I will, Jack, as soon as Elon does.
So
As soon as Elon pays back the government for all the early generation tax credits that all the Tesla owners got from 2013 forward, I'll go ahead and write back my $1,500 or $15,000 that I've received in tax credits for the 2 electric cars that I own.
So isn't there's a cap on, was it 80 grand? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean yeah. So there didn't used to be a cap. The couple caps that got put in place is, number one, the price of the car. Number two is where it was manufactured. So it's got to be a lower entry point price, and it's also got to be manufactured in the U.S.
So interesting. Joe was on it. He said the credit did not include Teslas, correct?
No, the credit does include Teslas now. It did not include Teslas previously
Earlier.
because they'd reached their production quota. So the credit is for new and used now, whereas it used to only be for new. That was another question that just came up. It's a reduced credit for used. But yeah, and the Tesla, my girlfriend ChatGPT said that the estimated value that Tesla owners received in the early days was about $2 billion of tax credits before the phase out limitation hit. But now they get them again. So anywho, tirade done.
So I'm interested in that.
It is a long way of saying, like, look, if they're going to make changes on the margins of the Inflation Reduction Act, I could see them taking the EV credit away, and woo, look at what we did, But at the same time, so if I was rushing to try to get the credit, you should buy one, in 2024, or at least place your order in 2024. If I wanted to get the credit and I was going to otherwise incentivize my purchase, because I would put this in the, better than 75% chance that would be a change that everybody could kind of wrap their arms around and say, yippee, look at what we did. And frankly, I think that it was probably a good idea to have a production quota anyway, like they used to have, because, I mean, if I'm producing a couple million units a year, I don't need to be subsidizing that industry, or that manufacturer anymore. So that probably made sense. It doesn't change the fact that I didn't look it up, but, for all the people that are like, I want to keep my gas and you can pull the gas out of my cold dead hands, unless Europe switches its policy of banning the sale of new gas-powered vehicles, unless China changes its policy of banning the sale of gas-powered vehicles, and unless California changes its policy of banning the sale of gas-powered vehicles, like it's gonna happen. You can debate subsidizing it or not all day long, but there'd have to be some pretty fundamental global shifts in policy changes to have it revert back to before.
Couple additional like caveats just before we move on from this one. Weren't there some income caps that like if you went over a certain threshold, you were not able to
Yeah,
qualify for
yeah,
that?
there was like $150,000. Like first off, you had to have income. It wasn't a refundable credit. And then north of I think 150 grand, you started to phase out.
And then also leasing,
Leasing
um,
qualified, which was neat.
which is interesting. I mean, from what I understand, the dealer gets the rebate, but it can then apply towards a lower lease payment for you. Is that
Yep,
accurate?
that's true.
Okay, cool.
And Gary,
Uh,
I'll also say that, from the manufacturer's point of view, because I represent dealerships of various brands, that there was a push towards it, and I think there was a question in the Q&A about, the infrastructure for building charging stations and stuff like that,
Yeah,
which I don't know the answer to, but the car manufacturers were incentivizing dealers on the whole, moving towards electric.
mhm.
And then there was kind of a pause on it because they didn't know if, okay, the whole, we're going to start drilling for oil in the US and all these other things that were going on in American politics. And then what's interesting, though, is that one of my clients shared with me the sound file of what it's going to sound like when you start up a muscle car, an electric muscle car, and it's going to sound like a rocket taking off, like a jet
oh,
engine
Oh
taking
yeah,
off, which
wow.
is really cool. So, they're appealing to, and so my son drives, he races go-karts competitively, and so part of the thrill of it all is the combustion of the engine, and it's like, okay, so you hear now the engines, you don't hear the engines, you just hear them kind of going by, maybe, and so. It's those kind of things that the manufacturers have to think about, and so people have skin in the game beyond kind of the core people that we're talking about. So the people who are running these organizations, NASCAR. What is NASCAR going to do when you can't hear that engine going at 240 miles an hour or whatever it is, kind of thing, or the F1 cars? But there
yeah,
are initiatives within all of those organizations to be more carbon friendly. I don't think they'll ever go to full electric without having the noise, but for us ordinary consumers, there's been consideration as to, okay, well, the people who enjoy that cold start when every time they start their car, we got to accommodate those people who want those kind of things.
yeah.
Well,
And it,
if you saw Tesla came out with, or it may be, an add-on from China, who knows, but they've got sound packages, and one of the sound packages for so those Teslas is like a Dodge Hellcat,
yeah, that's
which
funny.
is
Yeah.
funny.
So I just looked it up. China's ban is in 2030, California's 2035, Europe's 2035. In other words, like you still have a gas powered car, you just can't buy any new ones after those dates. So unless all of that changes, I don't see a scenario where things change to stay with gas and fossil fuels.
So
Um, Go ahead.
we've got two questions that have come in, one with Matt and then Joe, which I'm gonna go to in a little bit because it'll ignite some conversation, I'm sure. But Matt's question, would buying a used 19 or 2022 Subaru plug-in hybrid with about 20,000 miles as they come off lease qualify for $7,500 tax credit?
Um, I believe that would qualify for the used car credit, which is roughly half. Um,
All right.
yeah, so the only other thing that I wanted to hit on as well, Gary, was what other legislative changes might happen, as a result of tax policy. And I think you're what I've seen in the banter back and forth so far is that there's going to be this kind of it's supporting the boatsman theory of we're not going to see a whole lot of changes. And that's because there's just been a lot of banter back and forth between, people that want to do a tax cut, and then budget hawks who are like, not without a spending cut. Um, so that's just a statement. Like there seems to be like a lot of rubber on that, and with an extremely thin margin in the House, I mean, you pretty much you can't you're still not going to be able to lose, really any votes in the House to get something through. And then secondly, um, on the we'll pay for it with tariffs front, um, that the verdict so far has been mixed in terms of, does the consumer pay for a tariff or not? In other words, like, okay, you're technically, it is correct that a tariff increases government revenue, but what was the result of the China tariffs that happened? And so far, the results have been mixed, meaning like 100, what they showed was that 100% of the tariff was not passed on to the end consumer, because China did some of its own currency manipulation and stuff like that to negate some of the effects. Sometimes the retailer just ate the margin. So at the same time, it wasn't like totally neutral to the consumer. So I see that. At the same time, tariffs are an area where technically they're supposed to have legislative approval with certain exceptions. A 10% across the board tariff would be one of those that one would think would require legislative approval. However, anytime that a prior administration has implemented a tariff that Congress had said, you needed our approval, they never do anything about it anyway. So, I would sort of plan on, something being done on the tariff front. Outside of that, bonus depreciation I could see coming back as part of fixing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But that's really, again, boatsman speculation. That's really about it. I do not see the ability to get any other massive changes done. I think the other one that I was with another client the other day that has a pretty large Hispanic population, and he said that what was interesting is in 2017, a lot of enforcement mechanism, when there was a lot of talk about immigration and stuff like that and illegal immigration, that a lot of enforcement discussion quieted as soon as crops started rotting in the field. So I just, so I feel like that's another one where it's like, hey, something may happen, but at the same time, but not when oranges get more expensive. So that's another one where it's like, there's a lot of people talking and concern. It's like, it's going to be a tough one to get done. Anything like there's been talk about.
So, two things, Joe, it's good to see you here. This is a great question. This would be a great place for Elon and Vivek to tackle. What happened to all the money that was supposed to go toward building out the infrastructure of charging electrical vehicles? Like, I think, what did they get? Billions, and 6 charging stations got built, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to like what the end result is, but all of what Joe's talking about is part of the Inflation Reduction Act, and it was a 10-year program. So arguably, only part of the money has been deployed. The rest of it would still have yet to be deployed. And again, going back to, so in other words, when they're talking about reducing the amount of reducing stuff in the Inflation Reduction Act. The only thing that I've seen on the table so far with that is literally the EV tax credit. Everything else I've not seen anybody say, "Hey, let's cut that because that's wasteful spending." Because if I go to build an electric charging infrastructure, that is congressional district neutral.
Yeah.
I'm spending money in that area, to do something with that, which is going to employ utility contractors, electricians, everything else to build the infrastructure. And it's funny, as a driver of something that I can't currently plug into a Tesla charging network, hopefully I will be soon, as soon as I get my adapter. Shit, you want to put Elon in charge of that? You got my vote. Like every time I drive by a Tesla charging infrastructure and I see that they're all working, and mine is not, I'm like, man, he'd be a good choice, for all that.
FOMO, man, FOMO.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
this is a good question from Joe as well. Speaking of tariffs, would Korea as a favored U.S. trade partner be exempt?
I don't know why they would, considering that he slapped tariffs on Canada, the UK, and Mexico last time around, and specifically targeted industries. So I think I don't see a scenario where they're going to carve out exceptions based on favored status.
The one thing that I've heard is like they're going to target China very heavily. So maybe it's a scalpel approach, maybe it's a chainsaw approach. I don't know. We'll
Yep.
see. But the one thing, like whether you love him or hate him, um, that whole space launch yesterday and what Musk has been able to do, like I think we really are watching the Einstein and Edison combo embodied in Elon Musk in our lifetime. Like whether you like him or hate him, like the dude is off the chain smart. I'm glad I don't work for him because as an engineer, if you're an engineer, there's no way you could keep up. I actually know the guy that ran the Model 3 plant for him. And after about 3 years of trying to keep up with Elon and having no sleep, he just couldn't do it. It's like that dude does not sleep. And like he'd be leaving the plant at 2 in the morning and Elon would call him. Like just who knows? I don't know how that dude does it. Alex, I saw your hand is raised. Hit us in the chat or in the the Q&A. You got a question. That'd be great.
So Gary, hopefully as he's launching these rockets, they don't hit any UAPs. Just saying.
Then they're going to have to change the acronym. It was DUAP. DUAP. Oh, not a problem, Alex. So he raised his hand by mistake. All right. Any other questions? Don't poke the bear. That's funny. There is a friend of mine that owns a number of restaurants. He and I were talking this morning, and he said that there's a Netflix. He was talking about some of the trials and tribulations of just dealing with the governmental bureaucracy, and it's usually state and local. It's not the federal, but just some of the crazy stuff. See, he has some pretty amazing stories, but he said evidently um, there's a Netflix thing called The Bear, and it's about I don't have you seen it, Jack? You're smiling, but it's about a restaurateur in Chicago.
That's a great series.
Dub Bear, Dub Bears. But he said, he goes, Gary, it's very accurate. It's very accurate. So, and he even raised the issue about, some immigration. This is a guy that he was pardoned by Trump. He's been on the Anything But Typical podcast too, by the way. Um, he was pardoned by Trump, but he said, the on job sites because they're building another restaurant and this and that. he said, man, a lot of these job sites are filled with immigrants. And he said, they're very worried about what's going on. And he said, so many of them are really good people. He said, yeah, there's a crop of bad ones, like what happened with Lincoln Riley and these Venezuelan gangs that are now in 16 major cities, which is terrifying. Um, and I said, well, I think basically what I'm hearing from the former ICE director that's going to be the border czar guy, um, they're going after the hardcore criminals. That's who they're targeting. Now we'll see. Uh, you know, Hard to know what, between bravado and actually action, we'll see. So,
And just a PSA, not to be confused with Cocaine Bear that came out in 2023 about a bear who was, had a cocaine habit,
no
which,
kidding.
yeah,
Oh,
I was
that's
thinking when you said, 'cause that's why I was smiling. I was like, okay, someone had said, like a comedian had been joking about Cocaine Bear year when it came out. And yeah, Ray
gosh.
Liotta, I looked it up. It grossed 57 million worldwide, and it's a true story that they found a bear that was OD'd on cocaine in somewhere in Georgia in the forest. And so it sparked someone's creativity to make a movie that apparently was somewhat successful. So again, thank you, Cliff Clavin. Mind what's
That's
going on.
funny. Yeah, I
Yeah.
had no idea about that one, but I am going to check out The Bear, um, because that sounds interesting. A lot of the documentaries and stuff like that, and I know that's not a documentary, but man, there's some amazing documentaries going on even now that I'm like, wow, it's really been cool. Um, Including Martha Stewart. That one's really an interesting one. Um, Anything else? Like we're coming up to the top of the hour. Any other questions? This has been a fun conversation. By the way, we are, just a reminder for anybody who came on late, we are shut down next week. You should be too. Thanksgiving. We actually have a funny, a funny post that we're gonna do. I found a really hilarious photo that we just had to doctor a little bit. So that'll come out next week. But anyway, thank you guys for taking time out of your day to join us. If anybody came on late and you're wondering, hey, I want to go back and learn a little bit more on this EV stuff or whatever, you'll find it on the BGW CPA YouTube channel later on this afternoon. Shoemaker has the same sort of thing on their YouTube channel, so Shoemaker Law. Um, Jack, thank you as always. Appreciate you. Same way with you, Adam. And everybody, Papa Joe, is good to see you on here too. So thank you guys for participating, and we'll look forward to in 2 weeks.
Thank
Oh,
you. Have a
don't
good
take your
Thanksgiving.
EV to Wilmington.
All right, see you guys.
Why? All right, see ya.
Bye.
Bye.